be able to join you. So I was asked to kind of talk about, Indigenous issues in the North, and I work a lot with thinking about different ways of valuing our resources and how we make decisions in policy. So I'm going to tell you a bit of a story and just give you a bit of flavor about how the different ways that we can discuss things beyond just thinking very rigidly and structured. So I'm to start giving you a story of melting ice in the Yukon. Quickly, some more about me. Did I do that right? Yes. Right now, I'm actually a consultant with my business called Subarctic Research and Strategy, and I put up my little logo there because I feel it says a lot about me. So I'm First Nations with the Champagne and Aishihik First Nation, which is located in the little right-angle triangle of the Yukon Territory, which you can see is up in the northwestern corner of Canada. I also work a lot with water. I work a lot with nature in general, and particularly water. I have done quite a few projects that think about how we value water, how we make decisions, how we use water for power. I've worked a lot in hydroelectric. And then formally, I am a biochemist and a microbiologist, so quite a bit of my work has looked at the ecology of water, and I've looked at quite a few pathogens and different types of bacteria and how they play a role in the world that we live in. So essentially, I'm going to tell you a story that was told from Mrs. Angela Sidney from Tagish. That's so funny. It's exactly where I am. It's about 45 minutes from Whitehorse, but Angela Sidney is part of the Carcross Tagish Nation. So I'm here in her home telling her story. That's really nice. It's called The Two Smart Brothers. And it starts with two brothers that fell asleep on the ice, and they woke up to find that they had broken off and floated way downstream. They manage to reach the shore, and they go off and they meet many different groups of people that have all of these strange customs. It takes them a very long time to get home. But I'm going to go back and forth to that story. And I'm going to tell you another story that goes with ice and thinking about water. It's not going over. Uh-oh. I don't know what to say. There we go. So I'm sure many of you have probably seen this diagram. It's water in all of its various forms. And water is incredibly strong when it's formed as ice. It takes a lot of energy to break those covalent bonds that form that structure. And then it goes into liquid water, and then with extreme energy and heat, it boils and it forms into steam. And a lot of people, when they find out that I'm a chemist or a biochemist, they ask me about this, how ice and water form. But when it goes the opposite way, ice can start by little microscopic pieces. And then pieces of water join it and join it and join it. And this process is called ice nucleation. And that's how you form something like a snowflake. Little bacteria can take advantage of this in bugs during the winter. So something like the mountain pine beetle or the spruce pine beetle, which is a real issue here in the north, that affect the trees, and particularly either spruce or pine trees. They have sort of like an antifreeze in their guts. And during the winter time, this antifreeze prevents ice nucleation. But when I was working, at one point in time, I discovered a bacteria called Renella aquatilis that acts to prevent this antifreeze from working. And so instead of the bugs freezing at minus 30, they freeze at like minus 20. And it's really good. It's important that it gets cold here. And because if it doesn't, those bugs, they thrive. And unfortunately, our winters, too, as in many other places, are much more warm than they used to be. So the beetles are doing quite well. But that's just another quick little story about ice, right? How does ice form and how do the bugs use it? So back to the story about the boys. The first kind of group of people that they met, they had these round mouths, and all they could eat was maggots. And so they would spend all of their time just sucking up maggots. So they really liked the pine beetle, I guess. And so the two smart boys, they come around and they meet these people, and one of them, he's playing with some of the other kids, and all of a sudden he reaches into that other little boy's mouth and he pulls his mouth apart to be a mouth like ours. And the elders, they're like, holy, look at that boy. His mouth looks strange now. But then all of a sudden, that little boy, he's laughing. He's eating dry meat. And he is, able to do so much more than eat maggots. So all of the people, they all take their mouths and they pull it apart. And they thank the boys, and then they send them on their way with gifts and food so they can continue their journey. Another story is about ice and glaciers. So back in the day, when people used to cross glaciers, they would go over, and it was very dangerous, but we used to have to go to cross to get to the coast so we could trade. So people would always wear their best robes and their best clothing, because if they fell, they knew that they would freeze and be discovered, and they would want to make sure they looked good. So many years ago, we actually did discover a man. His name was Kwene Tinchi, which means long ago man found, and he was wearing a gopher skin robe. And we discovered him because the glaciers, of course, are melting, and people were up there doing, I think, tourism, and they came across him. So gopher skin robes are really important to us. Gophers used to be one of the main things that we ate and used as clothing, especially in the wintertime. The boys, too, the next group of people they found was a bunch of pregnant women. And all these pregnant women were all worried because they couldn't find their men to cut them open to get the baby out. And the boys were like, holy, why do you wait for your men like that? You can just push them out. So the first woman, they called all of these other women together, and she pushed out her baby. And they were like, wow, holy, that was not so bad. Guess we don't need men for that anymore. So they thanked the brothers too and showed them on their way and gave them food and everything. So I also have another quick story too that was told by Mrs. Kitty Smith of Shawshire, or Cluckshoe, which is my fishing village. It's where we get salmon. Dakwakata, as you can see on this map, is also called Haines Junction, and that's where my First Nation, Champagne and Aishihik, is from. The Nucleation Glacier is the story that Mrs. Kitty Smith talks about. And she said there was a medicine man that came from the salt water to the Yukon, and he wanted to clean out the Yukon people. He didn't like them. So he laid down in front of that Nucleation Glacier, the Lowell Glacier, and he concentrated very hard, and he told that glacier to move, and it did. And it cut off the Alexey River, and it flooded all through back this entire valley. Wherever you see lakes, they were all even deeper underneath water, and many people died. There are lots of superstitions in First Nations culture, and one is that if you cook grease, this is the Nucleation Glacier, it's very beautiful there. But if you cook grease such as moose grease or fish grease near glaciers, it will anger them and they'll move. And so it's kind of an interesting sort of thing. But with the floods, that really happened here. At one point in time, this entire area where I am and everywhere was all underneath water. And that was during the last Great Pleistocene. I think it's about 2.5 million years ago, and I think even more recent. But they've done many studies around where they can see how and where the water used to be. So this is one study by Gilbert and Deloges, where they looked at some of the striations on some of the regions. So this is by beautiful Kusuwa Lake, Yukon. And from Mount Vanier across, there used to be a huge glacier there called the Trump Glacier, which acted as a dam. And it held back all of the water. It was one of the main and last glaciers that really held the water back. And you can, when you sit there and you look down Kusuwa Lake, you can just see how if this dam broke, there's moraines and massive hills that go like this as you look down the valley. It's like ripples underneath the lakes. It's really quite interesting when you can look around at the scenery and you can see that we all used to be underneath water here. So I just wanted to ask really quickly about my time. What am I, 9:12? Do I have about 5
Yeah, you're
minutes
fine.
left?
You're fine.
Okay, great. So this doesn't go as fast as I'd like it to. There we go.
Delay.
So that continues, right? So if you look at this, this is, where the tide came in, you know, moved all the sand, moved it all flat, and then you can see that this creek has cut out its stream from along the water. And if you look here at Whitehorse Yukon, it's the same thing. So this is my hometown. I live across the river, pretty much between the yellow and the orange lines. But you can see that at one point in time, the water was way up where the orange lines are. And now it has moved down to where the river is, but at one point in time, it obviously sat where the yellow lines are as well. And now we live on a river delta and a floodplain, and most places in the Yukon do. But so that's a story of how all the melting ice has been shaping and changing the Yukon. So back to the boys here. The next group of people that I'm just going to keep talking. The next group of people that they find before heading on the way, they say they're not going to meet any more people as they go. It's not going. And they're told that they're not going to meet any more people and that the forest is full of dangerous creatures and dangerous animals. So they have run-ins with spiders and buffaloes and all of the, there we go, the legends. This is South Park. But all of the legends that people used to have tons of giant animals, giant beavers, giant gophers, like things that are quite small now. And I think that leads back to some of the earlier Ice Age times where the animals were quite a bit bigger. So they have all of these run-ins, and finally they run away and hide, and they go very fast, and then finally they run into some chipmunks. And a giant chipmunk runs up to them and says, you know, get on my back, I'll come, I'll save you. And so for many days they run and they run and they run, and then finally they run into a giant. And there's stories too about giants and about bushmen and these like, you know, Sasquatch type stories. And so the giant chases them forever on the back of this chipmunk, and finally the giant, he gets really tired and he gets really hungry, and he asks the brothers, he's like, oh, I can't chase you anymore. They're like, well, eat your ear. He's like, should I eat my ear? They're like, yeah, eat your ear, you'll be better. And he's like, but then I can't hear. And so he eats his ear, and then he's like, well, I'm still hungry. Should I eat my hands? They're like, yeah, eat your hands. But then I can't hold things. Oh, it's okay, eat your hands. So he eats his hands, and then he looks down between his legs, and the boys say, yeah, go for it. So he, you know, eats more of himself. And then the giant, he chops it up and he throws it on the fire so he can eat it. And then all of a sudden he starts to feel really tired and woozy, you know, because it's bleeding. And he lays down and he dies. So the boys, they say, how come that giant's so crazy? He must not have any brains. So they chop open his head, and out flies a swarm of mosquitoes. And that giant's head was full of mosquitoes. And it was June. And that's when mosquitoes come out, just like now. So it's 3 years later, and the brothers, they finally make it home. And it's just, I hope I did you good, Angela, Sydney. Thank you for your story. It's a very quick one. I left out parts of it, but just to end really quickly, there's lots of different ways that we can think about a commodity or about something. So when you think about ice melting, you know, think about when the ice goes out on the lake. You can think about the date that it goes. You can think about how thick the ice was. Is it going to cause an ice jam? But then you can also think about the ecology and the science. Is it going to, ice going out, is that going to increase the primary productivity of the lake? But for First Nations people, when the ice goes out, we think very round. We think, okay, that ice is going to go out early and that's going to affect the animals. And we think what that means for the animals the whole next year. So they're going to have trouble getting to where they're going to get to in the spring. They're going to have trouble finding the other animals that weren't able to get there. If the ice went out early, that means it's a warmer year. It might not be so good for some of the vegetation. It might not be so good for how the animals are going to live. And that affects our well-being. If the animals aren't where we expect them to be, it's harder for us to access them. So if the fish are affected by an early ice go, it's harder for us to fish and harder for us to have our connection with the land. And today, as the world changes so much, and as our culture changes, it's important that we're able to still keep with the land. So I think I'm out of time, but I wanted to say thank you very much for listening and hearing some of my stories. I just wanted to give a bit of a different presentation to talk about how you can really think about nature and all of the different ways that we can look at it. So Gwinnett, thank you very much.
Thank you. And then we will be moving right along to make sure that you have time for questions. So I'm going to hand over the presentation to Jannie in 1 second. Yeah. And then you have control, so feel free to begin.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm also very happy to be here. And thank you, Jocelyn, for your great presentation. I do love stories. So my name is Jannie Staffansson, and I'm Sami, the indigenous peoples from Europe. And I work for the Sami Council in Arctic-related issues, mainly with policies. And I'm going to talk some small information about what the Sami Council does and what Sami, what we are, what we do, some small parts of my challenges or my people challenges today, and also but some whatever comes along with that. You'll see. Stay put, and I'll see if I get this thing going. Do I just click on the presentation and then it changes slide, or is it way down? Okay, perfect. So here, oh no, okay. It's pushed twice.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, so here is my crowd from the Sami Council during the COP21 in Paris. The Sami Council, we were established in '51, and we are the oldest organization in Saami, that is the land of the Sami, in Finland, Norway, Russia, and Sweden. And we're working on various levels with human rights issues, with environmental rights issues, with Mother Earth rights issues. And we are trying to do that broadly, mainly within the Arctic Council, which is a council more for the Arctic states, where they collaborate on research or on environmental issues, and many other related issues to that, like health and such things. Sometimes we also work in UN systems with the Biological Diversity Convention, CBD, and also last year with UNFCCC. But due to limited funding, we don't have the ability to attend all of the important forums for these things. Sápmi, where the region of my people, I would say that the borders are not quite as we would like them to have. But if you follow the arrow here, you will see that it goes down further down, and that's where they have found remains of Sami living. We are a people of great diversity with 6 different languages and dialects within that. I was born here by the red dot in the very most southern part of Sápmi, and I'm now living in where the yellow dot is, and it's about 1,000 kilometers apart. I was brought up in a Sami community. Not very few, or we're rather few of us. We're reindeer herders, and that is a minority within the Sami people. My people are also gatherers, hunters, fishermen, craftsmen, yoikers, singers, storytellers, knowledge holders, and survivors. This is a very, very old picture that people mostly use when they're talking about indigenous peoples or my people, the Sami, that we are kind of savage, seen in colonizers' eyes, and the knowledge about our people is not very huge, unfortunately. But we're seen as a people that are very unintelligent, and we're living inside of animals' furs and dressing up as animal and not knowing much things. And in many international forums, we are seen as a poor people and vulnerable people, and the most vulnerable people. But I say that we have survived, we have sustained, we have been living in a sustainable way. We are still reindeer herders, as this picture shows of my family in my community. We are still living in those teepees, and we are still adapting towards all of the challenges that we have been facing, but also are still facing. And we are adapting. This is my baby sister learning how to respect Mother Earth and to respect the reindeers and to cherish them, but also how to live off of them. So I say we are not the most vulnerable people. We're not poor people. We are extremely rich. We have extremely rich knowledge. We have the knowledge to survive in a very harsh environment. And that does not make us poor, and that does not make us most vulnerable. Yes, we are experiencing a lot of stresses, and we are experiencing a lot of tragedy, but we are super resilient. That has made us we are adapting to all of those things that has been thrown at us and not caused by us. And I want you to also to get a hold of that. We have, that was some of the history part. Now I'm gonna go into what we are facing right now. So with our sustainable living as reindeer herders, for example, we have a lot of explosions on our lands. That's like this mine. It's the LKAB mine from Kiruna. It's over 100 years old. And as you see, it's huge. And right by it is this tiny small village, or it's not small. It's quite a big village in Sweden. But it's called Kiruna. And that entire village is about to move because the LKAB mine, they want to dig more, dig deeper, gain more money from it. And so they're actually going to move an entire city. That's how much funding they have. They have the capability to move an entire city only to dig more. And they call this co-living, coexisting, and sustainable mining. I say that's not the way I experience it and see it. Other things that also are facing this PowerPoint's not moving as fast, but here it is, are also renewable energy issues. In the 50s, 70s, Swedish government decided that they want to focus on renewable energy, and that's very good. But they wanted to do that in areas where no people were living. So it was obviously indigenous people's land. So many of our people were forced to leave their home, to leave their roots, to leave everything. And the state today are gaining a lot of money from these mega hydropower dams. And the Sami people, we get nothing from that. And the local people do not either. So it's very much giving and taking that's not really working here. We also have other exploitation issues in Sápmi, and also deforestation issues. And deforestation, people might think that that's only happening in the rainforest, but it's not. All of entire Sweden the forests we have in Sweden have probably been cut down sometimes. We have some small pieces of land left with old forest. And in Jokkmokk, where I live now, that small lost piece of forest that's very old, that holds a lot of biodiversity, that holds valuable vegetation for the reindeers to live off that takes years and years to grow. That last piece of forest, they're planning to cut that down now. And that's difficult for us to deal with and try to coexist with. Okay, okay, that went a bit fast. Here you go. And we also have climate change that are contributing to the fights and to our everyday struggles in life. We have lakes that are not holding, the ices are breaking in places where it shouldn't break or where it's usually not breaking. And we are losing people, we are losing animals, we are losing lives because of avalanches, because of climate change. We're losing reindeers in starvation because of climate change, because of rain on snow events during winter time. We are losing people with that as well. Other renewable energy sources we have is also, this is also one of the challenges we do have that are limiting our access to land and are fragmenting land and are changing and diminishing our adaptation capabilities. That's also the predators. They are experience the same thing. Their land is also getting smaller because they don't want to be close to people or in the big city. And when tourism is also attracting people into the mountains, they are coming closer to our herds. This is, for example, a calf killed by an eagle. In my community, we have all of the big animals as lynx, wolverine, wolf, bear, eagles, that we also try to keep the reindeer herd safe from and try to change the pasture and the living for the reindeer herd to be safe. We have also renewable energy sources as windmill parks. And this is one of the things that I want to talk some bit more about, because windmill parks is a great thing. It's renewable. It's kind of sustainable if it's placed right, strategically right, and not very far from the ones that actually are using up the energy and are not challenging other sustainable way of life. That's how I see it. So there are many communities. We have one community here. Oh, you missed her. And they're not a big community, but they're struggling against 20 different windmill companies that want to come in and exploit their land. And they themselves need to be the ones that are representing themselves in court. And they are losing heavily. And with that, they're losing their land as well because they don't have the capacity to deal with all of these legislation and also keeping the herd together at these times. Here is a community called Malo. You can see the blue pastures. That's where they have the winter land. And then the reindeers are migrating north through the blue or through the green areas and up to the yellow area here. And the area that's inlined into red, that's the calving ground. And on that calving ground, right here, they want to build, or they have been building, a huge windmill park. You see the green lines as well, that's the migration patterns, and that's a natural migration for the reindeers. So you can, when the reindeers is calving, they need to have a lot of silence to not be disturbed, because if there are disturbance, they will probably leave the calf, and then the calf won't survive. So you can see how this is an issue. So they made studies because the government or the people that were deciding in that area, they didn't believe that they were causing that much effect. So this is a GPS tool that they used. You can see the blue things that are the winter pasture areas that they used to have, and the summer pasture is on the pink area. And you can also see the red lines that are the migration pattern, and within that it's the then when this GPS was taken, planned windmill park. And this is after the park is built. So you can see how they used to have all of this area, and now they're only staying here because they can't use the migrating pattern because there are disturbances there. So this is a tool where you can use traditional knowledge that the indigenous people have and also use the technology that are available today in order to prove that this area is not a good place to have a windmill park. But it's hard to advocate for that. And that's what I'm working with in the Arctic Council, as you can see in this picture, that I try to bring the voices of my people forward in order to make the traditional knowledge valuable enough so that we don't have to prove all of this knowledge that we do have and save land and save capacity and save fundings, to actually make that a priority to build relationship with indigenous peoples in order to use the traditional knowledge when it comes to fighting climate change and all that comes with it, and development and sustainable development. We all wish for that to happen, but it needs to be sustainable. And I think that was all I have. And I think I might be on time. Am I?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, good.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Wonderful. Thank you for your very interesting presentation. We also covered renewable energy in the Arctic, so I'm sure that our participants will be able to appreciate the new perspective on that as well. And then hopefully we can also talk about that in discussions at the end of the webinar. So with that, thank you again for your presentation, and I will give the floor to Alexey, who can talk on the UN level about these kinds of topics. So Alexey, can you?
Hello everyone, and I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to be a panelist at this webinar. So this is my second time as a panelist at these webinars, and I'm very thankful for the organizers, for the previous colleagues who made presentations, very interesting presentations. And my presentation maybe will be not so focused on Arctic issues, but I will speak on my work in the UN expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples, which is one of the 3 indigenous specific mechanisms at the United Nations system. And originally I'm from the Russian Federation, from the Republic of Karelia, and my people, Karelian people, is actually a kindred people to Sami peoples, Samis, and my language, Karelian language, is one of the Finno-Ugric languages, and Sami language is from the same language group as well. So as a member, as members of the expert mechanism, we have the responsibility to prepare thematic advice for the Human Rights Council by the request of this UN Human Rights Council, and this advice is in the form of studies and research. Also, the expert mechanism can suggest proposals to the Council for its consideration and approval. So how can I? So, and this expert mechanism consists of 5 experts, each one from from the 5 geopolitical regions, and myself is representing Eastern European group of states, and we have experts from Brazil, the Philippines, from Canada, and from Democratic Republic of Congo. Actually, 1 month ago we concluded our 9th session, and we are approaching the 10th anniversary of MRIP next year. So, and this session is an annual session. So annually we have this 1 week session, five working days, and we accept our studies. We also consider other issues which are relevant to indigenous peoples. For example, this year we had in agenda post-2015 development agenda, sustainable development goals, and we considered also the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and how it's been implemented in different regions of the world. And these sessions are open for the states, member states, and for indigenous representatives, so everybody can contribute and bring own positions to the attention of the experts. Also, we considered follow-up to the previous studies and advice, and follow-up to the implementation of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples outcome document. And this World Conference was held 2 years ago in a format of the high-level plenary meeting of the General Assembly. And the last but not least is business and indigenous peoples' rights, which is very relevant agenda item for indigenous peoples. And in this regard, we have decided to increase our cooperation with other business and human rights related mechanisms within the United Nations system. For example, the working group on business and human rights. So far we have prepared 7 studies, thematic studies. For example, studies on the right to education, study on the right to participate in decision making, and the study on languages and cultures. Also, we made a study on the promotion and protection of the rights of indigenous peoples and access to justice, and we made another study on access to justice with the specific reference to indigenous women, children and youth, and persons with disabilities. Another study considered cultural heritage. And the most recent study is the study on indigenous peoples and the right to health. We are going to present this new study to the Council coming September. This is, I think this is a very comprehensive research. And for example, I have made some lessons learned from this study. One of these lessons is that access to quality and culturally appropriate healthcare for indigenous peoples in wealthy countries is not necessarily better than in developing countries. And another issue we discussed with experts is that it's impossible to discuss the right to development, for example, without ensuring the right to health. And we should strive to ensure the highest attainable standards for physical and mental health of indigenous peoples. Actually, I would like to, in the end of this study, we made a number of proposals for member states. For example, we proposed to states that they should implement national action plans for indigenous people's health in full consultation with indigenous peoples. Another proposal concerns full access to publicly run healthcare facilities, goods and services for indigenous peoples, especially in remote areas. Another proposal is about the need not to endanger the environment health of indigenous peoples, including through air pollution and water pollution. Collection of disaggregated data from indigenous peoples should be ensured also by states, and indigenous peoples should be allowed to participate, to practice and access traditional medicine, because in many areas, for example, in the Russian Federation, we have the shortage of qualified healthcare services workers, and it can be improved by involving indigenous persons knowing traditional medicine and developing paramedicine for these remote areas with indigenous population. States should ensure and secure access to quality healthcare services, including preventive care for nomadic and remote indigenous peoples. And especially experts are concerned with the situation with suicides and self-harm in indigenous areas, and we propose to states and international organizations, mainly to the WHO, to take care of this issue. And of course, educational initiatives for indigenous people should be prioritized by states, given the strong direct and indirect links between health and educational attainment. Another issue we considered concerns indigenous persons with disabilities, and prior to the session we had a two-day expert seminar with the attendance of the two special rapporteurs, or United Nations special rapporteurs, the special rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities and the special rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples, and we tried to consider the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples from the disability perspective and the Declaration on the Disability Rights from the indigenous people's perspective. And of course, all these meetings in the United Nations have to be fully accessible for indigenous persons with disabilities. So this is about the right to health and this most recent study. And of course, we proposed to the Council some themes for the next study. So they have a choice now from these three. They of course can propose completely new if they want, but normally they consult expert mechanism and indigenous peoples when they are choosing these topics. So especially we propose to focus on human rights defenders, because this situation with human rights defenders is worldwide very dangerous, very concerned, and our former member of EMRIP and former chair of the expert mechanism, Jannie is now suffering in her own country, in Malaysia, when she organized a peaceful protest meeting, and now she is legally prosecuted by the local authorities and the government, and it speaks very loud that we should consider this topic, and also discrimination facing indigenous peoples in business and access to financial services. And the third topic we proposed to the Council concerns assimilation and destruction of culture. Also, along with these studies, we are doing surveys on the implementation of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and we are doing that based on questionnaire. We are disseminating the questionnaire to indigenous peoples organizations and states, and then we collect this answers from the stakeholders, and with the help of the University of Manitoba in Canada, we make a compilation. And also we have a lot of intersessional activities. We are trying to lobby indigenous people's rights in different organizations. And for example, these pictures are from a meeting in Brussels. The European Union, the European Commission, and the European Parliament invited a group of indigenous people, persons to discuss how the EU policy on indigenous peoples can be improved. And nowadays the mandate of the expert mechanism is being reviewed, and according to the outcome document of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, these improvements can be done in the coming September. For example, states are considering better independence for MRIP in choosing themes of the next studies. Of course, that be the main normative framework in the work of MRIP, enhance interaction between the different mechanisms, not only indigenous specific mechanisms, but also other mandate holders and national human rights institutions. And the main proposal coming from indigenous peoples is that the expert mechanism should country-specific issues, country-specific technical assistance, of course, by request of the member states, but we should have this opportunity to raise awareness and build capacities among indigenous communities and enhance the dialogue between the states and private sector and indigenous peoples. So I'm coming to the end of this presentation, and I would like to say that these are some of the focuses we have in between the sessions. So not only studies, but also these topics. For example, now we are preparing for a side event at the Forum on Business and Human Rights in coming November, and this side event will allow indigenous entrepreneurs to get more understanding on financial resources and about ensuring the non-discrimination approach in the entrepreneurship of indigenous peoples. And also, climate change is very hot topic for MRIP, because I can bring just one example from my country, from the Russian Arctic. Just recently, last month, we had a big mortality of reindeers in Nenets communities, which was caused by melting repositories and graves of reindeers with the Siberian plague, and a big mortality of reindeers, of course, is a threat for the livelihoods of indigenous peoples and for the right to life, for the right to health of these peoples. And the post-2015 development agenda is also a very big issue for MRIP, because you know, states last year states in consensus have endorsed the sustainable development goals, and this principle, no one has to be left behind, should be ensured. But we should also ensure that the approach for indigenous people should be different, because actually indigenous peoples have a different concept of the sustainable development. For example, this goal number 1, that anybody should earn like $1.25, but many indigenous people still live in non-monetary communities, in non-monetary societies, and indigenous peoples know how sustainable development should be ensured maybe even better than other people, because they have brought through centuries the linguistic diversity and the biodiversity. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and finally, like concluding, just would like to draw your attention to the specific theme of this year on the International Day of Indigenous Peoples, 9 August, and all 3 mechanisms of the United Nations pertaining to Indigenous peoples' rights made a joint statement. The theme of this year is right to education, and we called states to ensure discrimination-free and culturally sensitive education systems for Indigenous peoples, taking into account the languages and histories. So the education is also one of the focuses of the expert mechanism all these years. Thank you very much.